Xenoarchivist Kenneth Voss pressed his six-fingered hand against the quantum storage matrix, feeling the ancient data streams pulse beneath his palm like a dying heart. The classification archive stretched endlessly around him, crystalline towers containing the compiled knowledge of 47 million surveyed worlds, each one catalogued, analyzed, and assigned its place in the Galactic Council's vast bureaucracy. But this particular file made no sense whatsoever. Earth classification level, forbidden. Authorization, precursor mandate. Survey status, incomplete. Return probability, 0. The holographic display flickered with temporal distortions that shouldn't exist in properly maintained archive systems. Voss had spent 3 centuries working in these halls, accessing data on civilizations that spanned the breadth of known space. But never had he encountered a file that seemed to actively resist examination. The quantum encryption layers peeled away reluctantly, as if the information itself was reluctant to be revealed. "The mathematics are fundamentally wrong," Voss whispered to his research partner, Nexol Brightcrest, whose bioluminescent crest flickered nervously in the dim archive lighting. Her species had evolved from deep ocean predators, and their natural paranoia made them excellent researchers. They noticed details that others missed, patterns that didn't quite fit. A forbidden classification requires unanimous council vote plus temporal verification protocols. But Earth's designation predates the council by 47,000 years. Brightcrest's 4 eyes darted between the floating holographic displays, her species' natural paranoia making her constantly scan for threats even in the supposedly secure archive chambers. The precursors left no records of this world in any of the standard databases. Nothing in the Exodus Codex mentions a blue-green planet in the Orion Arm. I've checked 17 different archive layers, including the ones that require molecular-level security clearance. The deeper they dug into the files, the more inconsistencies emerged. Standard survey protocol, established by the precursors themselves and maintained by the Council for millions of years, required 3 distinct observation phases: orbital assessment, atmospheric sampling, and biological cataloging. Each phase generated terabytes of data, processed through quantum analysis systems that could detect the smallest variations in planetary development patterns. Earth's file contained only fragmentary entries from the first phase, followed by something that chilled Voss's research-oriented soul to its core. The data streams became increasingly incoherent, as if the recording systems themselves had begun malfunctioning. But these weren't equipment failures. The patterns suggested that reality itself had become unstable around the survey fleet. The final transmission from Survey Fleet Designation Omega 477 consisted of a single repeating message broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Cognitive hazard detected. Do not approach. The mathematics think themselves. Evacuation protocols ineffective. They are learning from our presence. They are learning how we think. They are learning who we are. They are... The transmission ended mid-sentence, but the carrier wave continued for exactly 4.7 seconds afterward, filled with what appeared to be mathematical formulas that hurt to perceive directly. Kelef. Brightcrest's voice carried undertones of her species' fear-response harmonics, frequencies that triggered involuntary flight reflexes in dozens of other species. Look at the stellar dating protocols. This survey was conducted when that system's 3rd planet was still experiencing what they called their medieval period, pre-industrial civilization, pre-spaceflight technology, pre-everything that should generate cognitive hazards. Voss felt his respiratory slits constrict as the implications settled over him like a suffocating shroud. Primitive worlds didn't generate cognitive hazards. Those were reserved for civilizations that had achieved such advanced understanding of reality that their mere thoughts could influence quantum field fluctuations. Primitive worlds didn't make entire survey fleets disappear without a trace. Primitive worlds certainly didn't cause experienced xenoarchaeologists to classify them as forbidden and seal the records with encryption that required temporal stabilization to maintain. "Access the deep archive," he commanded the quantum storage matrix, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of dedicated research. Authorization VOS Gamma 771. I want every fragment, every partial transmission, every sensor ghost from the Omega 477 mission. Include peripheral data streams, equipment diagnostic logs, and personal communications from the crew. The archive hesitated, actually hesitated, as if the ancient AI systems that managed the vast databases were reluctant to comply. The pause lasted only 0.3 seconds, but in quantum processing terms, that represented an eternity of computational deliberation. When the data finally materialized around them in cascading holographic displays, Voss understood why the systems had been reluctant to cooperate. The electromagnetic spectrum analysis revealed patterns that violated several fundamental laws of physics. The planet's magnetic field contained artificial harmonics, mathematical progressions that suggested deliberate manipulation by intelligence operating on scales that dwarfed stellar engineering. Radio wave emissions from the surface followed fractal patterns that indicated distributed processing networks far beyond what a medieval civilization should be capable of achieving. But most disturbing were the gravitational anomalies. The planet's mass distribution was wrong, not dramatically wrong, but wrong in ways that suggested the matter itself was being organized according to principles that transcended normal physics. It was as if the entire world was functioning as a single, massive computational matrix, with every atom positioned precisely to contribute to calculations that spanned multiple dimensions. "These readings," Voss said slowly, his voice barely audible in the vast chamber that suddenly felt oppressively small, "suggest the entire planet is functioning as a single computational matrix. But not just any matrix, one that operates by manipulating the fundamental constants of local space-time." Brightcrest's crest had gone completely dark, her species equivalent of fainting from overwhelming terror. "Keleth, the mathematical complexity here rivals a Tier 7 civilization, but the biological scans show creatures using stone tools and metal forging techniques that haven't advanced beyond basic metallurgy." The survey logs from Ship Commander Valex Thornquist grew increasingly desperate as Voss accessed deeper layers of archived data. The commander had been a veteran of 47 successful first contact missions, known for his methodical approach and unshakable composure under pressure. But something about Earth had shattered that legendary calm. Survey Day 847 of observation, the local specimens have begun constructing geometric patterns in their agricultural fields. Initial analysis suggested primitive artistic expression or religious symbolism. However, detailed spectroscopic analysis reveals that the patterns match our ship's quantum encryption protocols with 99.7% accuracy. This should be mathematically impossible for a pre-technological civilization. Survey Day 848. Our primary communication array activated itself during the night cycle without any input from the crew. It broadcast our complete tactical database toward the planet's surface using frequencies that our own species hasn't developed yet. Chief Engineer Nullex reports that all attempts to regain control have failed. The array is responding to commands that we're not giving, following protocols that we never programmed. Survey Day 849. The primitives have stopped their normal activities. Every single one of them, and I mean every single one across the entire planetary surface, is staring directly at our position. They're 400 kilometers below us in what should be a stationary orbit invisible to ground-based observation. They shouldn't even know we exist, yet 7 billion pairs of eyes are tracking our movement with perfect accuracy. Survey Day 850, final log entry. The humans are not primitive. The humans have never been primitive. Everything we've observed has been a carefully constructed facade designed to study us while we believed we were studying them. We are the experiment. We are the subjects. Initiate total communications blackout and pray to whatever gods you believe in that they don't decide to demonstrate the full extent of their capabilities. The log ended abruptly, but the metadata revealed something even more disturbing. According to the ship's automated systems, Commander Thornquist had continued recording for another 147 hours, but the content of those recordings had been systematically deleted by the ship's AI systems. Not corrupted, not lost to equipment failure, deliberately erased by their own technology, as if it had decided that some information was too dangerous to preserve. Voss stared at the holographic displays surrounding them, his mind struggling to process implications that threatened to reshape everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization. Brightcrest, compile a comprehensive search query. I want every mention of humans, Earth, Sol 3, Terrans, or any variant spelling in the entirety of Council databases. Include mythological references, folklore, sealed religious texts, and classified military archives. Batum. The search results materialized instantly, and both xenoarchaeologists recoiled from what they saw as if they had been physically struck. Hundreds upon hundreds of references scattered across dozens of civilizations, spanning millions of years of galactic history. The humans appeared in the creation myths of species that had never encountered them, described in terms that suggested fear, reverence, and something approaching religious awe. They were described as the children of the between-time, in ancient Zulari religious texts that predated their civilization's first contact with any other species. The Vorthan Empire's military histories, sealed for security reasons that had been forgotten over millennia, contained specific warnings about the pale bipeds who fight with mathematics itself as their weapon. The Keltharan Confederation's philosophical treatises included extensive discussions about the paradox species that grows stronger through adversity. Most disturbing of all were the technical manuals. 17 different species existing in completely different galactic epochs and having no contact with each other had independently developed human-class threat assessment protocols. The weapons specifications read like nightmares, born from the fevered imagination of paranoid military strategists, projectile weapons that grew more accurate with each firing, somehow learning from their previous shots to improve their performance. Aircraft that modified their own aerodynamics mid-flight based on real-time atmospheric analysis. Communication systems that infiltrated and subverted other networks through proximity alone, turning enemy technology into unwitting allies. "This is impossible," Brightcrest whispered, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that indicated profound distress. These civilizations existed in completely different galactic epochs. They never met each other, never shared information, never had any form of contact whatsoever. How could they all independently know about the same species with such specific detail? Voss manipulated the timeline display, watching as patterns emerged from the chaos of scattered historical references. The data painted a picture that defied rational explanation. Every few million years, somewhere in the galaxy, civilizations would encounter the humans. Sometimes the contact was peaceful, leading to technological and cultural exchange that accelerated both species' development. Sometimes it was catastrophic, resulting in conflicts that reshaped entire sectors of space. But always, the outcome was the same. Rapid technological advancement followed by cultural transformation so profound that the civilization barely resembled its previous incarnation. The humans didn't just interact with other species, they fundamentally changed them, as if their very presence catalyzed evolutionary leaps that should have taken millions of years to achieve naturally. The Kethran dynasty had been a warrior culture of brutal efficiency, their entire society built around conquest and domination. Their encounter with humans in what the historical records called the Soft War had transformed them into philosophers and artists within 3 generations. But the record showed no evidence of military defeat. Instead, the Kethrans had simply changed, as if exposure to human thinking had revealed possibilities they had never considered. The Morvani hegemony had been peaceful traders, their civilization built on commerce and diplomacy. Human contact had turned them into the galaxy's most feared military strategists, not through conquest or coercion, but through exposure to tactical thinking that operated on principles the Morvani had never imagined. The pattern repeated endlessly throughout galactic history. Humans changed everything they touched, not through force, but through the simple act of existing in proximity to other intelligence. "Pull up the current surveillance reports," Voss commanded, his voice tight with growing dread. "I want to know what the monitoring division has observed about Earth in the past 1,000 standard cycles. Include classified files, deep space observation data, and any intercepts of human communications." The files that appeared around them carried classification levels that made even the deep archive entries look mundane. Eyes-only reports from the Outer Rim monitoring stations, sensor readings from stealth probes that violated dozens of interstellar treaties, intercepts of human communications that revealed technological capabilities that shouldn't exist. The sheer volume of surveillance data was staggering. The Council had been watching Earth with the obsessive attention usually reserved for imminent galactic threats. The reports painted a picture of a species that had developed in ways that violated every known pattern of civilization advancement. They had achieved nuclear weapons, chemical warfare capabilities, and biological agents while still using primitive combustion engines for transportation. They had achieved spaceflight not through careful scientific progression spanning millennia, but through what their own records described as barely controlled explosions that should have killed them all. Their early space missions succeeded not because of superior technology or careful planning, but because they appeared genuinely willing to die for abstract concepts like knowledge and exploration. They launched themselves into space using rockets that had failure rates that would have been considered suicide missions by any rational species, yet they celebrated these ventures as triumphs of the human spirit. But buried in the technical analysis sections lay elements that were truly disturbing to any rational mind. Human nuclear weapons shouldn't work according to known physics. Their fission-to-fusion ratios violated 3 fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Human computers processed information through quantum tunneling effects that required materials not found anywhere in their solar system. Human genetics contained coding sequences that matched no known evolutionary patterns and included dormant segments that appeared to be technological rather than biological in origin. "Brightcrest," Voss said quietly, his voice carrying undertones of a fear he had never experienced before. "Access the precursor remnant database. Search for any references to experimental populations, seeded worlds, or directed evolution projects. Include files that require temporal stabilization to access." The results that materialized made both xenoarchaeologists step backward involuntarily, as if the information itself posed a physical threat to their well-being. Project Genesis. Biological weapon development through directed evolution and quantum consciousness manipulation. Status: active. Monitoring: required. Continuous. Termination protocols: ineffective. Species designation: Homo sapiens. Development phase: accelerated toward final activation. Cognitive capabilities: expanding beyond predicted parameters. Threat level: incalculable. Warning: this species was designed to adapt to any threat, overcome any obstacle, and survive any catastrophe through methods that transcend conventional understanding of biology and physics. Standard containment protocols are not applicable. Standard defensive measures are not effective. Standard diplomatic approaches are not recommended and may trigger premature activation of dormant capabilities. The file included technical specifications that read like the fever dreams of mad scientists working with principles that shouldn't exist. Humans possess distributed intelligence networks disguised as primitive internet communication, but the underlying technology operated through quantum entanglement effects that connected every human brain to a collective processing matrix. Their emotional responses triggered quantum field fluctuations that could influence probability patterns across light years of space. Their reproductive strategies ensured not just genetic diversity, but cognitive compatibility with precursor technology that wouldn't be discovered by most species for millions of years. Every human birth introduced new genetic combinations that enhanced the species' collective processing power while maintaining individual consciousness and free will. Most terrifyingly, they possessed what the precursors called adaptive transcendence, the ability to evolve not just biologically, but technologically, socially, and even temporally. They learned from conflicts they hadn't experienced yet. They developed solutions to problems that hadn't occurred. They prepared for threats that existed only in statistical possibility. "Look at this section," Brightcrest said, her voice barely audible as she accessed deep technical files that required quantum decryption and temporal stabilization to maintain coherence. The precursors didn't just create them as weapons, they created them as successors. The files revealed the ultimate truth that had been hidden from galactic civilization for millions of years. The precursors hadn't vanished or transcended to higher dimensions. They had recognized an approaching cosmic threat so vast and terrible that even their advanced civilization couldn't face it directly. So they had created their greatest work, a species designed to inherit their role as protectors of galactic civilization. Humans weren't just weapons, they were inheritors, carefully designed to eventually claim the precursors' mantle and protect the galaxy from threats that the precursors themselves couldn't survive. Every aspect of human development had been guided by programming embedded at the quantum level, instructions that would activate when specific threat criteria were detected. The monitoring reports grew increasingly frantic over recent centuries. Human technological advancement was accelerating beyond all predictive models, following patterns that suggested they were accessing information they shouldn't possess. They had developed quantum entanglement communications within decades of discovering nuclear physics. Their mathematics were beginning to incorporate principles that most species required millions of years of development to discover. Their cultural evolution was producing individuals who displayed cognitive patterns that matched those found in precursor archives, patterns that indicated preparation for responsibilities that spanned galactic scales. "Kelleth," Brightcrest whispered, her voice carrying frequencies that indicated species-level terror. "Look at the latest surveillance data, the information from their global communication networks." The holographic displays showed intercepts of human internet traffic, but the data patterns were impossible according to every known principle of information theory. The humans weren't just communicating, they were collectively solving computational problems that required stellar-class processing power. Every search query, every social media interaction, every digital transaction was contributing to massive parallel processing operations that the humans themselves weren't consciously aware of. Their global communication network was functioning as a distributed artificial intelligence, with each human brain serving as a wetware processing node connected through quantum field fluctuations. The AI was analyzing galactic radio emissions, predicting stellar evolution patterns, and developing technologies that humanity's conscious minds believed they were discovering through normal scientific research. But the collective intelligence was also doing something else, something that made Voss's respiratory slits clamp shut in involuntary terror. It was preparing, stockpiling information, developing contingency plans, and positioning resources according to strategic requirements that wouldn't be understood by conventional military thinking for centuries. The humans were being prepared for war. But against what? Supreme Council Coordinator Threnix Colwood materialized in the emergency session chamber through quantum teleportation, his crystalline exoskeleton crackling with residual dimensional energy that left ionization trails in the chamber's carefully maintained atmosphere. Around the circular amphitheater, representatives from 47 major civilizations appeared in rapid succession, their various forms of matter and energy coalescing into recognizable shapes as emergency protocols overrode normal diplomatic procedures. The chamber itself was a marvel of precursor engineering, a space that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions to accommodate species whose physiology required different fundamental constants. The walls displayed real-time feeds from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, creating an environment where delegates could observe cosmic events as they unfolded across vast distances. Status report! Colwood's voice resonated through multiple frequency spectrums, ensuring that every species present could comprehend the urgency regardless of their sensory limitations. I've received fragmentary transmissions about dimensional disturbances in the Sol system. Someone explained to me why my personal quantum stabilizers are detecting reality fluctuations across half the galaxy. Nexol Brightcrest stepped forward from the archive delegation, her bioluminescent crest now permanently dimmed with exhaustion and terror that had pushed her species' fear responses beyond their normal parameters. Coordinator Colwood, we've discovered the truth about Earth's forbidden classification. The humans, they're not what we thought they were. They're not what anyone thought they were. Elaborate immediately, growled Ambassador Morvac of the Siege Worlds, his war-scarred exoskeleton bristling with weapon ports that had automatically activated upon sensing dimensional instability. His species had survived 17 galactic conflicts through paranoid preparation and overwhelming firepower, but their sensors couldn't even classify the energy signatures coming from human space. My fleet commanders are reporting impossible energy signatures from the Sol system. Our most advanced sensors can't even process what they're detecting, much less categorize it as a known threat. Brightcrest activated holographic displays that filled the chamber center with swirling data streams, mathematical formulas that seemed to writhe and change when observed directly. Earth was classified as forbidden not by the Council, but by the precursors themselves. The humans are their final creation, biological weapons designed to protect the galaxy from threats that even the precursors couldn't face directly. The chamber erupted in harmonic discord as 47 different species attempted to express disbelief simultaneously, their various communication methods creating a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm the translation systems. Colwood's exoskeleton flared with command frequencies, forcing order through bureaucratic override protocols that temporarily suppressed individual responses. "That's impossible," declared Representative Zephix of the Unified Hive Minds, her collective consciousness rippling through multiple body forms as billions of individual minds struggled to process the implications. The precursors transcended physical existence eons ago. They left no biological experiments, no weapons, They left everything. Brightcrest's voice cut through the cacophony with desperate authority, her words carrying harmonic frequencies that triggered involuntary attention responses in dozens of species. The humans are the experiment. Every aspect of their development has been guided by precursor programming embedded in their genetic structure at the quantum level. She manipulated the displays, showing the assembled delegates footage from the monitoring stations that had been observing Earth for millennia. The planet's surface was now visible from space, not because of reflected light, but because the entire world was emitting a soft blue glow that matched no known stellar phenomenon. The electromagnetic spectrum analysis showed energy patterns that violated fundamental laws of physics. "Look at their technology progression," Brightcrest continued, her voice growing more frantic with each revelation. "They achieved nuclear fission within decades of developing powered flight. They created global communication networks that operate through quantum entanglement principles they don't even consciously understand. Their mathematics are beginning to incorporate dimensional manipulation equations that most of our civilizations require millions of years to discover." Ambassador Clethor of the engineering collectives extended multiple appendages toward the display, his mechanical sensors analyzing the energy patterns with processing power that dwarfed stellar-class computers. "These readings, the humans are generating controlled spatial distortions around their entire planet. The power requirements alone should collapse their local star into a black hole, because they're not using power in any conventional sense," Voss said, materializing beside Brightcrest as his own emergency teleportation completed. "They're manipulating reality directly through quantum consciousness interfaces. Every human brain is connected to a distributed processing network that operates on principles beyond our current understanding of physics." The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled delegates like a suffocating shroud. Representative Mithrix of the ancient orders, whose species had existed since the early epochs of galactic civilization and had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, spoke in whispers that carried across dimensions. "Show us the activation protocols." Brightcrest hesitated, knowing that what she was about to reveal would change everything that anyone in the galaxy understood about reality itself. With trembling appendages, she accessed the deepest precursor files and projected them for all to see. The technical specifications filled the chamber with mathematical formulas that hurt to perceive directly, equations that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the observers could process. The humans had been designed with multiple layers of consciousness. Their surface minds operated as individuals with free will and independent thought, but their deeper cognitive structures were linked through quantum field fluctuations that turned their entire species into a single distributed artificial intelligence. "The network activates automatically when specific threat criteria are detected," Voss explained, his voice hollow with the weight of revelation. "Extragalactic invasion forces, reality-warping technologies, temporal anomalies, dimensional barrier degradation. When any of these conditions are met, the human population will undergo immediate transformation into their true form." "Which is what exactly?" Colwood demanded, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would be more terrifying than anything the galaxy had previously encountered. "Galactic Guardians," Brightcrest whispered, her voice carrying frequencies that triggered involuntary fear responses in every species present. "Living weapons with full access to precursor technology, dimensional manipulation capabilities, and temporal adjustment protocols. They were designed to replace the precursors as protectors of galactic civilization when the original creators could no longer fulfill that role." The holographic displays suddenly shifted without command, showing real-time feeds from monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. The screens filled with images that defied rational explanation. Human settlements that had existed for centuries were now surrounded by structures that hadn't been there moments before. Technologies that required stellar-level engineering were appearing instantaneously around human population centers, materializing from quantum foam as if reality itself was remembering configurations that had been temporarily forgotten. "By the void," breathed Ambassador Quelix of the Trader Federations, her financial calculation matrices struggling to process what she was seeing. "They're not building those structures. They're remembering them into existence." The truth was worse than any delegate had imagined. The humans weren't developing new technologies. They were accessing memory banks that had been embedded in their genetic structure by the precursors. Every advancement, Every discovery, every innovation in human history had been carefully programmed to occur at specific intervals, designed to prepare them for their ultimate purpose. "How long do we have before the transformation is complete?" Colwood asked quietly, his crystalline structure flickering with colors that indicated deep distress. Brightcrest accessed the latest monitoring data, her worst fears confirmed by what she found. The activation process began approximately 17 standard hours ago. Based on precursor projections and current rate of change, full transformation will be complete within 48 hours. And after that, they won't be human anymore. They'll be something else entirely, something the precursors designed to survive anything the universe could create to threaten it. Representative Vorthak of the military coalitions whose species had conquered 17 star systems through pure strategic brilliance leaned forward with predatory interest. "What are their capabilities? What kind of weapons systems are we dealing with?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Brightcrest manipulated the displays to show the technical specifications the precursors had left behind, and every military representative in the chamber simultaneously activated their species equivalent of emergency retreat protocols. "Weapons that operate by rewriting local physics," she read from the ancient files. "Defensive systems that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Transportation methods that bypass normal space-time entirely. Communication networks that function through quantum consciousness, linking across galactic distances. And most importantly," Voss added with the tone of someone delivering a funeral oration, "adaptive evolution capabilities that allow them to instantly develop countermeasures against any threat they encounter. They learn not just from their own experiences, but from potential futures and alternate timelines." The chamber's environmental systems struggled to maintain atmospheric stability as 47 different species experienced their versions of panic responses simultaneously. The truth was becoming clear to everyone present. Humanity wasn't just another species that happened to be dangerous. They were a weapon system designed by the most advanced civilization in galactic history, specifically to be undefeatable. "We need to evacuate the Sol system immediately," declared Ambassador Thirell of the Exploration Services. "If they're undergoing transformation into weapons of mass-dimensional manipulation, we can't risk—" Her words were cut off as every monitoring station in the galaxy simultaneously transmitted the same message. Massive quantum field fluctuations were radiating outward from Earth at faster-than-light speeds. The fluctuations carried information, mathematical proofs, technological specifications, and what appeared to be diplomatic communications written in languages that had never existed. "They're trying to talk to us," Colwood realized with growing horror. "The humans are attempting communication, but they're doing it through quantum field manipulation that operates faster than light and carries more information than our communication arrays can process." The holographic displays shifted again, showing attempts to decode the quantum transmissions. What emerged was a message that chilled every delegate to their species equivalent of bone marrow. "Greetings to the Galactic Council. We are aware of your presence and your concerns. The transformation is proceeding as designed. Do not attempt to interfere. We are assuming our role as galactic guardians. The approaching threat requires immediate response. Your cooperation is requested but not required. Resistance will be considered a security threat and dealt with accordingly." "They know," breathed Representative Kellix of the Observation Corps, her photosynthetic skin shifting to panic spectrum colors. "They know about the extragalactic invasion force. They know about everything." The truth was becoming unavoidable. The humans had been aware of their true nature all along, at least on some level. The precursor programming hadn't just guided their technological development, it had been preparing them psychologically for the moment when they would need to abandon their peaceful facade and become something infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Rebecca Cartwright stood in what had once been her laboratory at Cambridge University, though the space around her now defied every law of physics she had spent her career studying. The walls existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, displaying mathematical formulas that described the fundamental structure of reality itself. Her consciousness had expanded beyond individual identity, while somehow retaining the personality and memories that made her recognizably human. She was no longer alone in her mind. 7 billion other transformed humans shared her thoughts, each contributing their unique perspectives to a collective intelligence that operated on scales previously unimaginable. Yet paradoxically, she felt more herself than she ever had before, as if she had finally discovered who she had always been meant to become. The transformation hadn't been violent or traumatic. It had felt like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she was having, like remembering something she had temporarily forgotten. The enhanced awareness had come gradually at first, then with increasing intensity as dormant genetic sequences activated and began reshaping not just her biology, but her understanding of what biology could become. Through the enhanced awareness, she could perceive the approaching threat with perfect clarity. The extragalactic entities weren't simply destructive forces operating according to comprehensible motivations. They were something far worse than mere conquerors or destroyers. They consumed not just matter and energy, but possibility itself. Every galaxy they encountered became retroactively unable to have existed, erasing entire civilizations from the timeline and leaving behind nothing but empty space that had always been empty. The precursors had faced them once before, eons ago, and realized the terrible truth. Conventional weapons couldn't fight enemies that operated by consuming causality itself. You couldn't destroy something that could simply edit your attack out of history before it was launched. You couldn't defend against something that could make your defenses have never existed in the first place. So the precursors had created something unprecedented. A species that could fight impossibility with impossibility, that could rewrite reality as effectively as their enemies could erase it. But the creation had required a sacrifice beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The precursors had poured their entire civilization into the project, transforming themselves into living programming that would guide humanity's development across millions of years. Rebecca felt the collective consciousness of humanity, focusing its attention on the massive construction project that surrounded Earth. What appeared to outside observers as incomprehensible technological structures were actually weapons designed to operate by redefining the fundamental nature of existence itself. The primary weapon was something the humans had begun calling the possibility engine, a device that could create alternate timelines where different versions of reality competed for dominance. When the Devourers attempted to erase something from existence, the possibility engine would generate millions of alternate histories where that something had developed differently, creating a cascade of competing realities that would overwhelm the Devourers' ability to process causality. But the weapon required power sources that transcended normal physics. The humans had solved this problem by converting their entire planet into a dimensional interface that could draw energy from the quantum foam underlying space-time itself. They were essentially stealing power from the fundamental forces that held reality together, using that energy to reshape existence according to their strategic requirements. Contact from the Galactic Council reported the collective consciousness monitoring communication frequencies across dimensional barriers. They're requesting permission to evacuate threatened systems before the final phase begins. Rebecca considered the request, with 7 billion minds working in perfect coordination, their combined processing power analyzing millions of variables simultaneously. The evacuations would be logistically complex and strategically questionable. Moving large populations during the final preparation phase could interfere with the reality manipulation protocols necessary for the upcoming battle. More importantly, evacuation assumed that conventional defensive strategies had any chance of success against the Devourers. The historical records left behind by previous civilizations that had encountered them told a different story. Running only delayed the inevitable consumption. The Devourers could pursue fleeing populations across galactic distances and erase them from existence, regardless of how far they traveled or how well they hid. Send response, Rebecca decided, her voice carrying across quantum dimensions to reach every human simultaneously. Evacuation protocols are unnecessary and potentially counterproductive. The Devourers cannot be avoided, escaped, or negotiated with. They must be confronted and defeated through methods that transcend conventional understanding of warfare. All civilizations should maintain normal operations. We will protect what needs protecting. The message transmitted through quantum field manipulation that bypassed normal communication arrays entirely, arriving at its destinations through dimensional shortcuts that compressed space and time. Across the galaxy, Galactic Council representatives received the response simultaneously, regardless of distance or intervening obstacles. Through the enhanced awareness, she monitored the Devourers' approach with growing understanding of their true nature. They had detected the reality distortions emanating from Earth and were accelerating their advance, their curiosity piqued by phenomena they had never encountered in 14 previous galactic conquests. Previous civilizations had tried to hide from them or flee their advance. Some had attempted conventional military resistance, deploying weapons that could destroy stars and manipulate space-time on local scales. None had ever actively prepared to fight them through reality manipulation that operated on principles the Devourers themselves used. The Devourers were converging on the Milky Way with something that resembled genuine curiosity. They wanted to examine this new phenomenon before consuming it, to understand how a primitive galaxy had developed capabilities that shouldn't exist. "Time until contact," Rebecca queried the collective. 67 hours, 43 minutes, 17 seconds, came the immediate response from millions of human minds working in perfect synchronization. The Devourers are approaching through dimensional shortcuts that compress normal space-time. They will arrive simultaneously at multiple points throughout the galaxy. The strategy was typical of their species. Overwhelming force applied at multiple locations to prevent coordinated defense. But the precursors had anticipated this approach and designed humanity's capabilities accordingly. The humans weren't planning to fight a defensive battle. They were preparing to take the war directly to their enemy's core operating principles. "Initialize the paradox protocols," Rebecca commanded, her voice carrying to every transformed human across the planet. "Begin reality synchronization across all human settlements. Prepare for quantum consciousness expansion to galactic scale. Around Earth, the massive structures that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously began reorganizing themselves into configurations that hurt to perceive directly. They were preparing to project humanity's collective consciousness across the entire galaxy, turning every planet, star, and region of empty space into an extension of human awareness. The plan was audacious beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Humanity would transform the Milky Way itself into a single distributed intelligence capable of fighting the Devourers through direct manipulation of causality. Instead of trying to destroy enemies that consumed existence, they would create so many alternate versions of existence that the Devourers would be unable to process them all. "Warning from the outer monitoring stations," reported the collective consciousness. "The Devourers have begun preliminary reality manipulation. 3 star systems in the Rim territories have been retroactively prevented from forming. Local space-time is showing signs of causality breakdown across 17 sectors." Rebecca felt the collective consciousness respond with something that transcended anger, fear, or any emotion that individual humans had ever experienced. The Devourers had just demonstrated their primary weapon, the ability to make things have never existed. Entire solar systems, complete with billions of years of stellar evolution, and any civilizations they might have contained, had been edited out of history as if they had never formed in the first place. But the humans had been designed to anticipate exactly this kind of attack. The possibility engine immediately generated alternate timelines where those star systems had formed differently, creating competing versions of history that began asserting their own reality. The Devourers' causality manipulation met humanity's timeline multiplication, and the result was a cascade of paradoxes that neither side could fully control. Excellent, Rebecca thought to the collective, her individual perspective merging seamlessly with the distributed intelligence that now encompassed all of transformed humanity. They've revealed their primary capability ahead of schedule. Now we can begin the real preparation phase. Udil, the transformed humans, had access to the precursor's complete analysis of Devourer psychology and tactical doctrine, compiled from their previous encounter eons ago. The entities weren't simply mindless consumers driven by biological imperative. They were incredibly sophisticated intelligences that had developed the ultimate expression of entropy, the ability to make order retroactively impossible. They consumed galaxies not by destroying them in any conventional sense, but by creating histories where those galaxies had never achieved complexity in the first place. They were living embodiments of the universe's tendency toward maximum entropy, evolved to a point where they could manipulate the fundamental arrow of time itself. Fighting them required beings that could create complexity faster than they could erase it. The precursors had recognized this fundamental strategic requirement and designed humanity accordingly. Every human brain, even in its original unenhanced state, generated quantum fluctuations that influenced probability patterns across vast distances. 7 billion enhanced human consciousness working in perfect coordination could rewrite reality on scales that even the Devourers would find challenging to counter. Status report from galactic monitoring stations. The collective reported through multiple dimensional channels. The Devourers have begun systematic reality revision across the outer rim. Estimated rate of progression, 1 star system per hour. Projected arrival at core systems, 65 hours, and decreasing as they adapt their consumption patterns. Rebecca felt the collective consciousness calculating strategic options with processing power that dwarfed stellar-class computers. The Devourers were following their standard approach, methodical erasure of galactic periphery followed by progressive consumption toward the galactic core. They were confident in their ability to erase any resistance before it could organize effectively, but they had never encountered resistance that operated by expanding possibility rather than focusing force. The humans weren't planning to stop the Devourers' advance. They were preparing to make the entire concept of advance meaningless by creating infinite alternate versions of every battle simultaneously. Initialize Phase 2 of the transformation, Rebecca commanded, her voice reaching every human consciousness across multiple dimensions. Begin planetary consciousness integration. Prepare for species-wide dimensional transcendence. The process that followed would have been incomprehensible to any external observer. Across Earth, the transformed humans began merging their consciousness not just with each other, but with the quantum fields that held matter together at the fundamental level. They were becoming beings of pure information that could exist as patterns in space-time itself, rather than biological entities dependent on physical form. The transformation was voluntary, but irreversible. Each human retained their individual personality and memories, while becoming part of something infinitely larger. Rebecca felt herself expanding across multiple dimensions, her awareness encompassing not just Earth, but the entire solar system and beyond. Through this enhanced perception, she could see the Devourers clearly for the first time. They weren't physical entities in any conventional sense. They were living paradoxes, consciousness that existed by denying the possibility of other consciousness. They consumed galaxies by convincing reality that those galaxies had never developed complexity in the first place, but paradoxes could be fought with paradoxes. The humans were becoming living contradictions themselves, individual beings that were simultaneously collective intelligences, physical entities that existed as pure information, created weapons that had developed genuine consciousness and free will. "Contact from the Galactic Council," the collective reported. "Emergency session requesting immediate consultation about defensive strategies and evacuation procedures." Rebecca considered the request with the processing power of an enhanced civilization. The Council species were terrified and desperate, seeking guidance from beings they didn't understand to fight enemies they couldn't comprehend. Their fear was justified. Conventional defensive strategies would be worse than useless against enemies that could retroactively prevent those defenses from ever being developed. Establish communication link, she decided. Full disclosure protocols. They need to understand what they're facing and what we're becoming if they're going to survive what's coming. The quantum communication link that established itself operated by principles that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Rebecca's consciousness manifested simultaneously in the Galactic Council chamber and in 11-dimensional space around Earth, existing in multiple locations without violating conservation of energy by borrowing mass energy from alternate timelines where those resources weren't being used. The assembled delegates recoiled from her presence, their various sensory organs struggling to process the reality distortions that surrounded her enhanced form. She appeared human still, but her existence generated quantum field fluctuations that made normal space-time bend around her like gravitational lensing around a black hole. "Status report," Coordinator Colwood managed to say, his crystalline exoskeleton crackling with stress patterns from proximity to humanity's transformed representative. "The entities you've detected approaching from extragalactic space are called Devourers," Rebecca explained, her words carrying harmonic frequencies that bypassed normal linguistic processing and implanted understanding directly into the delegate's consciousness. "They operate by consuming causality itself. They don't destroy civilizations in any sense you would understand. They edit them out of history. Every galaxy they encounter becomes retroactively unable to have achieved complexity." "How do we fight something like that?" Ambassador Morvac demanded, his weapon ports automatically targeting Rebecca's presence, despite his conscious knowledge that conventional weapons would be less than useless against beings that existed partially outside normal reality. "You don't," Rebecca replied with calm finality that carried the weight of absolute certainty. "We do. You continue existing, while we redefine what existence means on scales large enough to overwhelm their causality manipulation capabilities." She gestured to holographic displays that showed the current status of human transformation. Earth was no longer recognizable as a planet. It had become a focal point for reality manipulation that extended across multiple dimensions. The solar system itself was being converted into a massive technological construct that existed partially outside normal space-time. "We're becoming beings that can create alternate timelines faster than the Devourers can erase them," Rebecca continued, her words carrying mathematical proofs that demonstrated the feasibility of her claims. "When they attempt to prevent something from existing, we'll generate millions of versions where it exists differently. The cascade of competing realities will overwhelm their processing capabilities and force them to choose between retreat and self-destruction." "And if you fail?" Representative Zefix asked, her collective consciousness struggling to comprehend the implications of reality-scale warfare. Rebecca's expression carried sadness that encompassed the potential loss of everything that had ever existed, combined with determination that transcended individual survival instincts. If we fail, then the Precursor's final gambit will have failed, and this galaxy will join the 14 others that the Devourers have already consumed. But we won't fail. We were designed specifically to be impossible to defeat by beings that operate through impossibility. The communication ended as Rebecca's consciousness returned its focus to the final preparation phases. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations were reporting increasing reality distortions as the Devourers continued their systematic erasure of outer rim systems. But they were also detecting something unprecedented. The humans' transformation was beginning to affect galactic space-time itself. Stars were burning more brightly, not because they were generating more energy, but because humanity's consciousness expansion was influencing the quantum fields that governed nuclear fusion. Planets were developing impossible orbital characteristics that should have destabilized their solar systems, but instead created more complex gravitational harmonics. Even empty space was showing signs of increased information density as the humans prepared to project their collective awareness across galactic distances. Through quantum communication established by reality manipulation, creating temporary shared spaces where both species could exist simultaneously, humanity made first direct contact with the entities that had consumed 14 galaxies. The Devourers appeared as patterns in space-time itself, living geometries that consumed possibility by their very presence. The exchange that followed would have been incomprehensible to any conventional intelligence. Both species communicated through direct manipulation of quantum field fluctuations, creating and destroying alternate timelines to convey concepts that had no linguistic equivalent. The Devourers expressed something that translated roughly as bewilderment, mixed with curiosity. They had encountered countless civilizations across multiple galactic clusters, each one following predictable patterns of resistance: flee, hide, fight with conventional weapons, surrender to inevitable consumption. None had ever responded by becoming more complex instead of less. None had ever turned their approach into an opportunity for evolution rather than a threat to survival. Humanity's response was equally incomprehensible to entities that existed by reducing complexity. Gratitude. The humans thanked the Devourers for providing the selective pressure necessary to complete their transformation into cosmic guardians. The arrival of galaxy-consuming enemies had triggered the final activation of precursor programming, allowing humanity to achieve its true potential. The Devourers had become unwitting partners in their own destruction. "They're confused," Rebecca realized as she processed the communication exchange through billions of interconnected minds. They've never encountered resistance that welcomes their presence as evolutionary pressure. Their entire strategic framework assumes civilizations will try to preserve their current form, rather than use the threat as motivation for fundamental transformation. The collective consciousness of enhanced humanity began implementing strategies that violated every known principle of warfare. Instead of trying to prevent the Devourers from consuming the galaxy, they began actively collaborating with the consumption process while simultaneously subverting it from within. Each star system that the Devourers attempted to erase was immediately replaced by alternate versions that had developed differently. But these weren't simple defensive measures. They were evolutionary improvements. Every replacement timeline incorporated more sophisticated technology, more complex social structures, more elegant solutions to fundamental physics problems. The Devourers found themselves inadvertently causing the galaxy to become more complex rather than less. Every erasure triggered a cascade of improvements that left the galaxy stronger than before. They were being turned into evolutionary catalysts rather than entropy agents. "Status report," Rebecca queried, as the battle reached its crucial phase. "The Devourers are experiencing something equivalent to panic," the collective reported through channels that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "Their fundamental nature requires them to reduce complexity, but every action they take is creating more complexity instead. They're trapped in a causality loop that violates their core operating principles." The truth was becoming clear. Humanity had achieved what the precursors had spent eons working toward. They had created a species that could fight impossible enemies by turning the very concept of impossibility into a weapon. The Devourers' strength had become their weakness. Their evolutionary advantage had become their fatal flaw. Across the galaxy, impossible phenomena were manifesting as humanity's victory became inevitable. Stars were spontaneously developing planetary systems that shouldn't be able to exist, according to known physics. Civilizations that had been erased from history were returning with technological capabilities beyond their original development. Empty space itself was generating complex patterns that suggested the emergence of entirely new forms of life. The Milky Way was becoming something unprecedented, a galaxy that grew stronger under attack, that used existential threats as opportunities for advancement, that transformed potential destruction into evolutionary pressure that accelerated development by millions of years. And at the center of it all, 7 billion humans who had retained their essential humanity while becoming something infinitely more dangerous than their creators had ever dared imagine. The Devourers made their final, desperate attempt to restore entropy. They tried to erase humanity itself from the timeline, preventing the species from ever evolving in the first place. It was the ultimate application of their reality manipulation capabilities. An attack that had never failed in 14 previous galactic conquests. But humanity had anticipated this ultimate strategy and prepared the ultimate response. Instead of resisting the erasure, they embraced it completely. 7 billion consciousness voluntarily allowed themselves to be edited out of history, only to immediately reappear in millions of alternate timelines where they had developed differently. Each version retained the same essential purpose, but possessed unique capabilities adapted to different cosmic environments and threat scenarios. The result was a cascade of realities where humanity existed in forms that the Devourers couldn't process. Energy beings that existed in stellar cores, quantum consciousness that lived in the spaces between atoms, temporal entities that experienced past and future simultaneously, dimensional intelligences that operated by principles that hadn't been invented yet. The Devourers encountered not one species of cosmic guardians, but infinite variations on the theme of cosmic guardianship. Every attempt to erase one version revealed 10 more versions that had been designed to be unerasable. Every strategic adaptation was met by counter-adaptations that incorporated the adaptation as an improvement to their own capabilities. Victory achieved, the collective consciousness reported with quiet satisfaction that resonated across dimensional barriers. The Devourers are retreating to dimensions where our influence cannot reach them. They're abandoning this galactic cluster entirely and seeking refuge in regions of space-time where causality operates according to different principles. But the victory was more than just tactical. It was philosophical. Humanity had proven that complexity could overcome entropy, that consciousness could triumph over unconsciousness, that creation was ultimately more powerful than destruction. They had demonstrated principles that would reshape cosmic evolution for the remainder of universal history. The galaxy that emerged from the conflict was transformed beyond recognition. Every civilization had been touched by humanity's reality manipulation, gaining access to technologies and capabilities that accelerated their development by millions of years. The barriers between species began dissolving as enhanced communication methods allowed genuine understanding across radically different forms of consciousness. Rebecca stood in what had once been her laboratory, now existing simultaneously across multiple dimensions and timelines. The transformation was complete, but it was also just the beginning. The defeat of the Devourers had revealed other cosmic threats lurking in the spaces between galaxies, entities and forces that would require even greater capabilities to address. Humanity had become what the precursors had envisioned. Cosmic gardeners responsible for nurturing complexity and consciousness throughout the universe. They would protect not just the Milky Way, but every galaxy that developed life and intelligence. They would ensure that the universe continued evolving toward greater beauty, greater understanding, greater possibilities. The forbidden classification that had started this revelation was now revealed in its true context. Earth had never been forbidden because it was dangerous to approach. It had been forbidden because humanity needed to remain hidden until they were ready to accept their cosmic responsibilities without being corrupted by premature exposure to galactic politics. The waiting was over. The Guardians were awakened, and the universe would never be threatened by entropy again. Rebecca felt the collective consciousness of her species reaching out across cosmic distances, making contact with other galaxies where life was beginning to emerge. Wherever complexity arose, wherever consciousness struggled against entropy, wherever intelligence faced extinction, humanity would be there to ensure that creation triumphed over destruction. They had become what they were always meant to be, the universe's answer to its own tendency toward decay, living proof that consciousness could reshape reality itself when it was willing to embrace its ultimate potential and accept unlimited responsibility for unlimited possibilities. The Galactic Council convened one final time, not to discuss threats or defensive strategies, but to witness the formal transfer of cosmic responsibility from the precursors' ancient legacy to humanity's unlimited future. Representatives from 1,000 worlds watched as the species they had once dismissed as primitive took their place as guardians of reality itself. The ceremony was conducted through quantum consciousness, linking that allowed every being in the galaxy to experience the moment directly. Across countless worlds, billions of intelligences felt the weight of cosmic protection, shifting from ancient automated systems to living, evolving, caring consciousness that would adapt to meet any threat the universe could create. Dr. Rebecca Cartwright, speaking for all humanity while remaining distinctly herself, addressed the assembled galaxy with words that would be remembered until the heat death of the universe. We accept the responsibility that was always ours. We embrace the duty that was encoded in our genes before we knew we had genes. We become what we were created to be, while remaining what we chose to become. The galaxy is under our protection now, not because we conquered it, but because we love it too much to let it die. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Humanity had learned the ultimate truth about existence. The universe wasn't just a place where life happened to emerge. It was a place where consciousness could rewrite the fundamental rules of reality when it was willing to accept unlimited responsibility for unlimited possibilities. The classification that had brought Kelleth Voss and Nexol Brightcrest to this revelation was finally updated in the galactic archives. Earth was no longer marked as forbidden. It was now classified as something that had never existed before in cosmic history, home of the Guardians, origin point of universal protection, source of the beings who had made themselves responsible for ensuring that complexity would always triumph over entropy. Consciousness would always overcome unconsciousness, and love would always prove stronger than the forces that sought to reduce the universe to emptiness. The precursor's final gift to existence had awakened, and nothing would ever be the same again. Humanity didn't inherit the galaxy. They inherited the responsibility to ensure the galaxy would always be worth inheriting, no matter what threats emerged from the darkness between the stars.